Alright, number one, the first thing you need to do is see where does the graph cross the y-axis. If I look at this graph on the y-axis, which is our vertical axis, it crosses at -1, so my b is -1. The next step that I do is I find another point to the right of this point. I'm going to go down here at 1, -2. And then I draw my similar triangle. To get from my y-axis to this point that I drew, I'm going down 2 to the right 1, so my slope is -2. Once I've identified my slope and my y-intercept, then my equation is y equals -2x minus 1. For number 2, on my y-axis, the graph does not touch the y-axis, so there is no b, there's not a y-intercept, there's nothing that I can write for b. Okay, so this is not going to be written in slope-intercept form because we know just by looking at this graph, this is not a function because this does not pass the vertical line test. However, we learned whenever we talked about positive and negative slopes, when we talked about zero slopes, that when I can't go, once I go up and then I can't go left or right, that's like saying 1 over 0. If 0 is in the bottom of a fraction, that is called an undefined number. So this is an undefined slope. But I can write an equation for it. We've talked about these equations. For every point, my x-coordinate is going to be 2 because I'm going to the right 2, and then down 1, to the right 2, up 2. So my equation is x equals 2. For number 3, we cross the y-axis again at -1, and I'm going to pick a point to the right of this that crosses right on a crosshair so I can identify that point specifically. To get from 0, -1 to 2, 0, I'm going up 1 over 2. So my equation, y equals mx plus b, y equals 1/2 x minus 1. Alright, on the back, number 4, write the following equations in slope-intercept form and identify M and B, slope and y-intercept. This is where a lot of people are going to miss it because a lot of people are not going to do that, and that's automatically 3 points off for every slope that you don't identify and every 3 points off for every y-intercept that you don't identify. In order to identify M and B, and in order to write it in slope-intercept form, we have to get y by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do on A is I'm going to add 3x to both sides so that this -3x will cancel out. Then I'm going to bring everything else down. 5y equals 3x minus 15. Some people will write -15 plus 3x. Slope-intercept form says y equals mx plus b. Whatever x term we have, that is what we need to write first. Okay? We divide by 5 for every number in the equation so that I'm left with y by itself on the left side. 3 divided by 5 does not give me a whole number, so I'm going to leave it as a simplified fraction. And -15 divided by 5 is -3. When you identify your M and your B, your slope and your y-intercept, M is the coefficient of x. It's the number between the equal sign and the x, so that is 3/5. And B is the constant, or the number at the end of the equation. That is -3. For B, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start with my 2x and bring it over here so that I can get y by itself. I'm subtracting my 2x on both sides so that I can get rid of this 2x on the left. And I'm bringing everything else down. -6y equals -2x minus 18. I have -6 times y. I want to get rid of -6 so that y is by itself. I do the inverse operation. Divide by -6 for every number in the equation. Negative 6 divided by negative 6 is 1. That leaves me with y. Negative 2 divided by negative 6 does not give me a whole number, but negative 2 will go into both negative 2 and negative 6. That leaves me with 1 over 3x. And negative 18 divided by negative 6 is positive 3. My m is the number, now that y is by itself, it's the number in front of x, so m is 1/3. And my b is the number at the end, 3. For c, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to subtract 8x from both sides so that it will cancel out on the left, and I bring everything else down. Negative 2y equals negative 8x minus 20. I have negative 2 times y. So in order to get y by itself, I have to divide by negative 2. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1. So that leaves me with y. Negative 8 divided by negative 2 is 4. Bring down your x. And negative 20 divided by negative 2 is positive 10. So m is the number in front of x, that is 4. B is the number at the end by itself, which is 10. For D, we have the same thing. We're going to subtract 5x from both sides because I want to get this y by itself. Bring everything else down. 2y equals negative 5x minus 40. I divide by 2 for every number. 2 divided by 2 is 1. That leaves me with y. Negative 5 divided by 2 does not give me a whole number, so I'll leave it as a simplified fraction. And negative 40 divided by 2 is negative 20. So m is negative 5/2. B is negative 20. For number 5, the very first thing you do is what we learned at the beginning of this unit. You have to find the constant rate of change. So I'm looking at what am I doing to my x's. To get from negative 2 to negative 1, I add 1. Negative 1 to 0, add 1. 0 to 2, add 2. 2 to 3, add 1. Do the same thing to the y's. To get from negative 11 to negative 8, I add 3. Negative 8 to negative 5, I add 3. To get from negative 5 to 1, I add 6. And to get from 1 to 4, I add 3. Constant rate of change is the change in y over the change in x. I have 3 over 1 again, 6 over 2, and 3 over 1. 3 over 1 simplifies to 3. 6 over 2 simplifies to 3. So my constant rate of change, or my slope, is going to be 3. This table is increasing at a rate of 3 every single time. Okay. For the y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis. If you're on the y-axis, you're not moving left or right to get to that point. You're just going up and down. So your x has to be 0. If the table tells you when the x coordinate is 0, then the y for that number is going to be your y-intercept. And then you just plug it in your equation. Y equals mx plus b, and that is your slope-intercept form. For the second one, find the rate of change again. To get from negative 3 to negative 1, I add 2. Negative 1 to a positive 1, I add 2. So we're adding 2. To get from negative 1 to 1, we add 2. To get from 1 to 2, we add 1. And to get from 2 to 4, we add 2. For my y's, to get from 13 to 5, subtract 8. To get from 5 to negative 3, subtract 8. Negative 3 to negative 7, subtract 4. And to get from negative 7 to negative 15, subtract 8. This is negative 8 over 2. We're doing our change in y over the change in x. This is finding constant rate of change, which is the exact same method that we'll use for finding the slope. Now I simplify. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Negative 4 divided by 1 is negative 4. So my constant rate of change, or my slope, is negative 4. To find the y-intercept, if I don't know when x is 0, I have to pick a point. It does not matter which point you pick. You're going to plug this in to y equals mx plus b. The point I'm using is 1, negative 3. And I found that my slope is negative 4. And in ordered pair, the first number is your x-coordinate. So I'm going to plug the 1 in for x. The second number is the y-coordinate, so I'm going to plug that in for y. And the slope I'm going to plug in for m. So I'm going to write this into an equation. Negative 3 equals negative 4 times 1 plus b. Negative 1 times 4 is negative 1. I bring everything else down. To get b by itself, I have to do the opposite of negative 4, which is adding 4 to both sides. Negative 3 plus 4 is positive 1. So my y-intercept is positive 1. Then I write my equation. Y equals m, negative 4, x plus b, and I've got my equation. How do we write equations in slope-intercept form from a table? The first thing I do, I find the constant rate of change by finding the difference, the change between each x value and each y value. And then I write the change in y over the change in x. Once I've identified that this is my slope, then I plug a point from the table and the slope into y equals mx plus b and solve for b. And to write the equation from a graph that passes through points 2, 2, and 1, 5, y minus y over x minus x, that's 2 minus 5 over 2 minus 1. 2 minus 5 is negative 3. 2 minus 1 is 1. Negative 3 divided by 1 is negative 3. That is my slope. And then we're going to do this just like we just said in our constructive response. I'm picking a point. 5 equals negative 3 times 1 plus b. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. 5 plus 3 is 8. So 8 is my y-intercept. And my equation is y equals negative 3x plus 8.